The coffee shop was nearly empty when Sarah Mitchell walked in, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. She had just closed a deal worth $3 million, and the adrenaline was still coursing through her veins. At 28, she was one of the youngest hedge fund managers in Manhattan, and she knew it showed in everything from her Chanel suit to the way she carried herself. She ordered her usual overpriced latte and turned to find a seat when she nearly collided with someone. Coffee splashed, narrowly missing her jacket. "I'm so sorry," the man said, steadying her with one hand. His voice was deep, amused rather than apologetic. Sarah looked up, ready to unleash her frustration, but the words died in her throat. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked deliberately messy and eyes that seemed to find something funny about the entire situation. "It's fine," she said, coolly, stepping back. She recognized him immediately. Everyone in finance did. Marcus Chen, billionaire tech entrepreneur, known for disrupting 3 major industries before he turned 30. He was also known for being insufferably arrogant. "You're Sarah Mitchell," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've heard about you. The shark in Louboutins. Isn't that what they call you?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And you're Marcus Chen, the man who thinks he can buy anything, including good manners, apparently." He laughed, a genuine sound that made other patrons turn their heads. "I like you already. Listen, I'm meeting some people here for a discussion. Why don't you join us? It might be interesting." Sarah should have said no. She had reports to review, calls to make, but something about his casual confidence irritated her enough to make her curious. "Fine," she said, "but I have 20 minutes." The discussion turned out to be informal, a group of entrepreneurs and investors debating about privilege and success. Sarah found herself engaged despite her initial reluctance. The conversation flowed from startup culture to economic mobility, and then Marcus turned to her. "You grew up wealthy, didn't you?" he asked. Sarah felt her defenses rise. "Upper middle class. My parents were comfortable." "So you've never really struggled," Marcus continued, leaning back in his chair. "Never had to choose between paying rent or eating. Never had to understand what it's like for 99% of the population." "And you have?" Sarah shot back. "You're a billionaire. Don't pretend you're some champion of the common people." "I grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment with my mother and grandmother," Marcus said quietly. "We were on food stamps until I was 12. I know exactly what it's like. Do you?" Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "Just because I didn't grow up poor doesn't mean I don't understand hard work. I've earned everything I have." "Have you, though?" Marcus challenged. "Or have you just been good at playing a game where you started 3 spaces ahead?" The table had gone quiet. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping loudly. "I don't have to listen to this." "Sit down," Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge now. "I have a proposition for you. Since you're so confident in your abilities, let's test them." Against her better judgment, Sarah sat. "What kind of proposition?" 30 days, Marcus said. "You live on $100. That's it. No credit cards, no bank accounts, no calling friends for help. You have to find a place to live, feed yourself, and survive. If you can do it, I'll donate $5 million to any charity you choose, and I'll publicly admit that success has nothing to do with starting advantages." The other people at the table were watching with fascination. Sarah's mind raced. This was insane. But the way Marcus was looking at her, with that insufferable smirk, made her want to wipe it off his face. "And when I succeed?" she asked. "If," Marcus corrected, "if you succeed. But like I said, $5 million to your charity of choice and a public apology." "And if I don't make it the full 30 days?" "Then you donate $5 million to my foundation for economic education, and you write an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal about how privilege shaped your success." Sarah's pride warred with her common sense. $5 million was a lot of money, even for her. And the thought of admitting defeat to this arrogant man made her stomach turn. But another part of her, the competitive part that had driven her to the top of her field, was already calculating. 30 days. She could do anything for 30 days. "Deal," she said, extending her hand. Marcus shook it, his grip firm and warm. "We start Monday," he said. "That gives you 3 days to settle your affairs. I'll have lawyers draw up the contract. And Sarah, no cheating. I'll be checking in randomly to make sure you're following the rules." "I don't need to cheat to beat you," Sarah replied. As she left the coffee shop, her phone buzzed with messages about the deal she'd closed. But all she could think about was the challenge she'd just accepted. How hard could it really be? That weekend, Sarah tried to prepare. She researched budget living, low-income housing, and survival strategies. But reading about poverty on the internet from her penthouse apartment felt absurd. She looked around at her life, the expensive furniture, the view of Central Park, the closet full of designer clothes. In 3 days, none of this would be accessible to her. Her best friend Jennifer came over on Sunday night. "You're actually doing this?" Jennifer asked, pouring them both wine. "Sarah, this is crazy. You don't have to prove anything to some arrogant tech bro." "It's not about him anymore," Sarah said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. "It's about me. I want to know if I can do it." "But why?" Jennifer pressed. "You've already proven yourself 100 times over. You're successful, you're brilliant. What's the point?" Sarah thought about how to explain it. "In that coffee shop, when Marcus challenged me, I realized something. I've spent my whole life assuming I earned everything through merit alone. But what if he's right? What if I had advantages I never acknowledged? I need to know." Jennifer sighed. "Well, if you're determined to do this, at least let me help you prepare." She pulled out her phone and started searching. "Okay, you'll need to find cheap housing first. That's going to eat up most of your money." They spent the evening planning, but Sarah could see the worry in her friend's eyes. When Jennifer left, she hugged Sarah tightly. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "I know you can't accept help, but just hearing your voice would make me feel better." "I will," Sarah promised. The first morning of the challenge arrived too quickly. Sarah stood outside a downtown bank with Marcus and a lawyer, signing papers that froze all her accounts for 30 days. Marcus handed her a white envelope. $100, he said. $40 in rent and utilities is the average daily cost for low-income housing in this city, which means you have about $17 a day for food and everything else. Good luck." Sarah took the envelope, feeling the thin stack of bills inside. She'd spent more than this on lunch yesterday. "No problem," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "I'll be in touch," Marcus said. "Remember, you can quit any time. Just call me and admit you were wrong." "Not happening," Sarah replied. She watched him leave in his Tesla, then looked around. The morning air was cold, and she was suddenly very aware that she was wearing clothes worth thousands of dollars, but had nowhere to go. Her apartment, her life, everything was off limits. She'd told her assistant she was taking a month off for a personal project. Her friends thought she was crazy, but none of them knew the real reason. First priority was finding a place to stay. Sarah had done her research over the weekend. The cheapest option would be a room in a shared apartment or a hostel. She started walking, using her phone while she still had it. The contract allowed her to keep her phone, but required her to cancel her unlimited data plan and switch to a basic prepaid service that cost $15 for the month. That left her with $85. Hours of searching and walking until her feet ached in her impractical shoes, Sarah found a posting for a room in Queens. $20 a night, shared bathroom, no kitchen access. It was in a building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s, but it was shelter. The landlord, a tired-looking woman named Rosa, looked her up and down suspiciously when Sarah arrived. "You got money?" Rosa asked. "Cash up front for the week," Sarah said, counting out $140. "Wait, that was too much." She recalculated. "For 5 nights," she said, handing over $100. Rosa took the money and gave her a key. "Room 12, 3rd floor. No noise after 10. No guests. Bathroom is shared with 3 other rooms." "You look too fancy for this place," Rosa added. "You running from something?" "Just trying something different," Sarah said vaguely. Rosa shrugged. "None of my business. Just pay on time and follow the rules." Sarah climbed the stairs, each step making her more aware of how different this was from her penthouse apartment. Room 12 was barely bigger than her walk-in closet had been. A single bed with questionable sheets, a small dresser with a broken drawer, and a window that overlooked a brick wall. The smell of old cooking and mildew hung in the air. She sat on the bed and it creaked ominously. What had she gotten herself into? Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Day 1, how's paradise?" Sarah typed back quickly. "Living the dream. You'll be writing that check in 29 days. His response came immediately. "We'll see." That first night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The mattress was lumpy, the room was cold despite the radiator clanking periodically, and she could hear every sound in the building. Someone was arguing in Spanish 2 floors down. A baby cried intermittently. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. She'd never realized how quiet her penthouse was, how insulated from the reality of other people's lives. She finally dozed off around 3 in the morning, only to be woken at 6 by someone banging on the bathroom door. She stumbled out to find a line of 3 people waiting to use the facilities. A young man with tattoos covering his arms glared at her. "You new?" he asked. "Bathroom schedule is posted on the door. You get 15 minutes max. We all got jobs to get to." "Sorry," Sarah mumbled, realizing she'd never even thought about sharing a bathroom, about coordinating her basic needs with strangers. The shower had weak water pressure, and the temperature fluctuated wildly between scalding and freezing. Sarah used her expensive shampoo and felt guilty about it, knowing it represented a luxury she couldn't afford to replace. She made a mental note to buy the cheapest products she could find. That first week was harder than Sarah had imagined. She learned that being poor wasn't just about having less money. It was about every single thing taking more time and more energy. Grocery shopping meant walking to 3 different stores to compare prices. Buying the smallest quantities because she couldn't afford to stock up even when bulk was cheaper. It meant doing the math constantly in her head, putting items back because she was 12 cents over budget. She bought rice, beans, eggs, and the cheapest bread she could find. Her daily food budget was about $7, after paying for her phone and putting aside money for next week's room. $7 that had to cover 3 meals. She quickly learned that fast food wasn't actually cheap when you were this broke. A dollar menu item was a luxury when you could make rice and beans for cents per serving. But cooking was its own challenge. She had no kitchen access, just a small hot plate she'd bought at a thrift store for $8. She cooked in her room despite Rosa's rules against it, hiding the hot plate whenever she heard footsteps in the hallway. The smell of rice and beans became a constant presence, clinging to her clothes and hair. The physical discomfort was constant. The room was cold at night, and the single thin blanket wasn't enough. She was hungry all the time, the kind of deep hunger that made it hard to think about anything else. Her body, used to regular meals and premium nutrition, rebelled. She got headaches, her stomach hurt. Her period came, and she realized with horror that she couldn't afford her usual products, forced to buy the cheapest options that were uncomfortable and unreliable. Her expensive clothes made her stand out, and not in a good way. She got stares, comments. One man followed her for 3 blocks asking why a rich girl was slumming it in his neighborhood. An elderly woman at the grocery store muttered in Korean, glaring at Sarah as she counted out pennies to pay for her rice. On day 3, Sarah broke down crying in her room. The walls were thin, and she tried to muffle the sound, ashamed of her weakness. She'd only been at this for 72 hours, and she was already falling apart. How did people live like this for years, for their entire lives? A soft knock interrupted her tears. She opened the door to find a young woman standing there, maybe 19 or 20, with a baby on her hip. "Hey, I'm Keisha from room 14, the woman said. "I heard you crying. You okay?" I'm fine, Sarah lied, wiping her eyes. Keisha gave her a knowing look. First time being broke, huh? I can tell. You got that look, like you can't believe this is real life. Sarah found herself nodding. Is it always this hard? Keisha shrugged. You get used to it. Not that you should have to. Look, I made too much rice tonight. You want some? I got some chicken too. Sarah wanted to refuse, but she was so hungry and so tired of eating plain beans. Thank you, she said softly. That's really kind. We look out for each other here, Keisha said. That's how we survive. Come on. Sarah followed her to room 14, which was only slightly bigger than her own, but felt more lived in. There were baby toys scattered on the floor, drawings taped to the walls, signs of an actual life being lived. Keisha's rice and chicken was simple, but tasted better than anything Sarah had eaten in days. So what's your story? Keisha asked, feeding her baby from a bottle. You're clearly not from around here. Sarah hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. I'm trying to understand what it's like to live on very little money, to really understand, not just read about it. Keisha laughed, but not unkindly. Well, you picked a hell of an education. How long you doing this for? 30 days, Sarah said. 30 days, Keisha repeated. And then you go back to your real life. Must be nice. Having a choice. Sarah felt the rebuke in those words, gentle but pointed. You're right, she said. I do have a choice, and that makes all the difference, doesn't it? Keisha nodded. I've been living like this since I was 16. Had my baby at 17, father disappeared. Work 2 jobs and still barely make rent. No end date for me. This is just life. How do you do it? Sarah asked. How do you keep going? Because I have to, Keisha said simply, looking at her baby with fierce love in her eyes. Because she needs me to. You find strength you didn't know you had when someone depends on you. But I'm not gonna lie, it's exhausting. Every single day is exhausting. That conversation stayed with Sarah. It put her own experience in perspective. She was playing at poverty, knowing she had an escape route. Keisha and millions like her had no such luxury. The weight of that realization sat heavy in her chest. On day 5, Marcus showed up at her building. He knocked on her door early in the morning, and Sarah answered, still groggy and hungry. Random check-in, he said, looking past her into the sparse room. Making sure you're still in the game. Still here, Sarah said shortly. She was very aware that she hadn't showered in 2 days because she'd been trying to save money by not buying toiletries. Marcus seemed to notice her discomfort. You look tired, he observed. I'm fine, Sarah lied. He handed her a business card. This is the number for the challenge hotline. You call it if you want to quit. No judgment. I'm not quitting, Sarah said firmly. 25 days to go. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. You're really doing this, he said quietly. I thought you'd quit by day 3. I'm tougher than you think, Sarah replied. I'm starting to see that, Marcus said. Look, I know this is hard, harder than you expected. But you should know, what you're experiencing, it's real. It's what millions of people deal with every day. The exhaustion, the hunger, the constant stress of trying to make ends meet. And most of them can't tap out after 30 days. I know, Sarah said. I met someone, a young mother in this building. She's been living like this for years. It's changing how I see everything. Good, Marcus said. That's the point. Not to humiliate you, but to open your eyes. After he left, Sarah sat on her bed and let herself have one moment of doubt. This was so much harder than she'd expected. It wasn't just about budgeting or being careful with money. It was the way poverty ground you down, made everything exhausting, took away your energy to do anything but survive. But Sarah Mitchell hadn't gotten where she was by giving up. She stood up, splashed water on her face from the shared bathroom sink, and made a plan. If she was going to survive this, she needed income. $100 wouldn't last 30 days no matter how careful she was. She started looking for work. But even this was complicated. Most jobs wanted references, background checks, a permanent address. She couldn't use her real resume because that would defeat the purpose of the challenge. Finally, after 2 days of searching, she found a restaurant that needed someone to wash dishes. Cash under the table, $50 a shift. The work was brutal. She'd never done manual labor like this before. Her hands got raw and cracked from the harsh soap and hot water. The kitchen was loud and hot, and the other workers viewed her with suspicion at first. But Sarah kept her head down and worked hard, and gradually they accepted her. Maria, one of the line cooks, took pity on her. "You're not used to this kind of work, are you?" she asked during a break. "Is it that obvious?" Sarah replied, examining her damaged hands. Maria smiled. "You'll toughen up." "Here," she said, handing Sarah a container. "Leftover rice and chicken from tonight. Take it. The manager doesn't care." Sarah wanted to cry at the kindness. "Thank you," she managed. "You don't know how much this means." "I've been where you are," Maria said. "Maybe not exactly, but I know what it's like to be hungry and scared. We gotta help each other. That's all we got sometimes." That became her routine. She worked 3 or 4 shifts a week at the restaurant, enough to keep her room paid and have money for food. The other days she spent at the library, which was free and warm, reading and trying to maintain some connection to her old life, even if she couldn't participate in it. The library became a sanctuary. Sarah discovered it on day 8 when she was looking for a warm place to spend the afternoon that wouldn't cost money. Inside, she found not just books and heat, but other people like her, people with nowhere else to go. Elderly men reading newspapers for hours, homeless people charging their phones at the outlets, students doing homework because their homes were too crowded or chaotic. She struck up a conversation with a librarian named Donald, a kind man
in his 50s, who seemed to understand why people came to the library for more than books. "First time here?" he asked as Sarah wandered through the stacks. "First time at this branch," Sarah said. "We get a lot of folks who come here to escape," Donald said gently. "You're welcome any time. We open at 9, close at 8. There's free Wi-Fi, bathrooms, and we don't judge anyone who needs a safe place to be." "Thank you," Sarah said, feeling emotion rise in her throat. "That means a lot." Over the following days, the library became part of her routine. She'd work her restaurant shifts, then spend her off days at the library, reading about economic inequality and social justice with a new understanding. The academic texts she'd skimmed in college now resonated with lived experience. She understood, in her bones, what they were describing. 2 weeks in, Sarah had adapted. She knew which bodegas had the cheapest produce at the end of the day. She'd learned to make meals that stretched for days. She'd discovered free clinics for when she got a cold she couldn't afford to treat. She'd found a church that served free dinner on Wednesdays. She wasn't proud, not anymore. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. The Wednesday dinners at the church were eye-opening. Sarah sat at long tables with dozens of other people, all there because they needed a free meal. A veteran with PTSD who couldn't hold down a job. A family of 4 where both parents worked but still couldn't afford enough food. College students trying to stretch their loans. People who worked full-time at jobs that paid minimum wage and still lived in poverty. She talked to them, learned their stories, and felt her perspective shift fundamentally. These weren't lazy people or people who'd made bad choices. They were people trapped in a system that didn't pay living wages, that charged exorbitant rents, that offered no safety net when medical emergencies or car breakdowns or any of 1,000 other disasters struck. Marcus came by again on day 16. This time, Sarah invited him to sit on the one chair in her room while she sat on the bed. "You're still going," he said. It wasn't quite a question, but there was something in his voice that might have been respect. "Did you think I'd quit by now?" Sarah asked. "Honestly, yes. Most people from your background would have." "What's it like?" Sarah asked suddenly, "growing up the way you did?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Terrifying," he finally said. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. One unexpected expense, one bit of bad luck, and everything could fall apart. My mom worked 3 jobs. I remember being 7 years old and knowing we might lose our apartment if she missed even one shift. That kind of stress, it changes you. You're always waiting for the other shoe to drop, always scared, even years later when you've made it out. Sarah thought about the last 16 days, how the constant worry about money had become a background hum in her mind. "And you got out," she said. "I got lucky," Marcus corrected. "I was smart, sure, but I was also lucky. Right place, right time, right people noticed me. I got a scholarship that covered everything, not just tuition. I met a mentor who believed in me. I had opportunities that a million other kids just as smart never got. For every kid like me who makes it, there are thousands who don't. That's what people like you don't understand. It's not about working hard enough. Everyone down here works hard. It's about whether you get lucky." "I'm starting to see that," Sarah admitted. "I've met people this week who work twice as hard as I ever did at my job, and they're living on nothing. Maria at the restaurant works 60 hours a week between 2 jobs, and she still has to choose between buying medicine and buying food some months. It's not fair." "No," Marcus agreed. "It's not. So what are you going to do about it? After this is over?" Sarah looked at him. "If I win, the $5 million goes to a job training program. I've already decided. And I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to use my position, my resources, to actually make a difference, not just write checks. Real change. I've been thinking about it constantly. There are systemic problems that need systemic solutions." Marcus smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "Good," he said. "That's what I was hoping you'd say. The challenge wasn't really about proving you wrong. It was about opening your eyes to what's really happening. I'm glad it's working." "You manipulated me," Sarah said, "but there was no heat in it. I challenged you," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. And you chose to accept. That takes courage." Over the next week, something shifted between them. Marcus started coming by more often, not for official check-ins, but just to talk. He brought food sometimes, carefully staying within the rules by bringing things that were freely available, like samples from stores or food from events. They'd sit in her tiny room or walk through the neighborhood, and Sarah found herself looking forward to his visits. "Tell me about building your company," she said one evening as they shared a pizza that Marcus had won in some radio contest, making it technically free. "It was terrifying and exciting," Marcus said. "I had an idea and no money to execute it. I slept in my office for the first year, showered at the gym, ate ramen every day, but I believed in what I was building. The hardest part wasn't the work, though. It was fighting the assumption that I didn't belong. Walking into investor meetings and seeing the surprise on their faces that some kid from the projects was pitching them. Having to prove myself twice as hard because I didn't go to the right schools or know the right people." "But you did it," Sarah said. "I did," Marcus agreed, "but it shouldn't have been that hard. And most people in my position don't make it, not because they're not talented or hardworking, but because the barriers are too high. That's what I'm trying to change, level the playing field a little." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she'd missed before. Beneath the confidence and success, there was someone who understood struggle, someone who'd earned everything he had, not through privilege but through sheer determination and, yes, some luck, someone who hadn't forgotten where he came from. "Why did you really challenge me?" she asked. "Was it just to prove a point?" Marcus met her eyes. "At first, yes, I was angry. I'm tired of people who've never struggled acting like poverty is a choice or a moral failing. But then I met you, and I saw something. You're not like the others in your world. You have potential to actually care, to do something meaningful. I wanted to see if I was right about you, and maybe I wanted to get to know you better." "And?" Sarah asked, her heart beating faster. "Was your assessment correct?" "You're remarkable, Sarah Mitchell," Marcus said softly. You're brilliant and stubborn, and you've spent the last 2 weeks living in poverty without complaining, learning, growing. Most people would have quit, but here you are, working in a restaurant kitchen, living in a room the size of a closet, and somehow becoming more beautiful every time I see you." Sarah felt her breath catch. "You think I'm beautiful?" she asked. "I haven't washed my hair in 3 days, and I smell like dish soap." "You're beautiful because you're real now," Marcus said. "That first day in the coffee shop, you were all polish and armor. Now you're just you, and I like you a lot." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them wanted to name yet. Sarah was suddenly very aware of how close they were, how Marcus's eyes had gone soft, how much she wanted to close the distance between them and kiss him. But she pulled back. "I need to finish this challenge," she said. "I can't let myself get distracted." "I understand," Marcus said, though she could see disappointment flicker across his face. 14 more days. Then we can talk about this, whatever this is." On day 20, Sarah had a crisis. She'd been careful with money, working her shifts and budgeting every penny. But she'd forgotten to account for an expense. Her prepaid phone plan was about to expire, and she needed another $15 to renew it. That left her with barely enough money for food until her next restaurant shift. She sat in her room, trying to figure out what to do. She could skip meals, but she was already so tired and hungry that she wasn't sure she could manage that safely. She could try to pick up an extra shift, but the restaurant wasn't always busy enough to need her. There was a knock on her door. It was Keisha, the young mother from down the hall. "Hey, I'm going to the food pantry tomorrow," she said. "You want to come? They give you basics, rice and canned goods and stuff. It's free." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. She had money, barely enough, but still. But then she stopped herself. This was reality for so many people. Using food assistance wasn't a moral failing. It was surviving. "Yes," she said. "Thank you for offering." The next day, Sarah and Keisha walked to the food pantry together, Keisha pushing her baby in a stroller she'd gotten secondhand. The line was already long when they arrived, dozens of people waiting patiently in the cold. "It's always like this at the end of the month," Keisha explained. "That's when everyone's money runs out." They waited for an hour before getting inside. Sarah watched the volunteers carefully check names, distribute boxes of food, treat everyone with dignity and kindness. When it was her turn, she gave her name and address, feeling both grateful and guilty. "First time here?" the volunteer asked kindly. "Yes," Sarah admitted. "Welcome," the volunteer said. "There's no shame in needing help. That's what we're here for." The box contained rice, pasta, canned vegetables, and some fresh. It was enough to get her through the next week without spending money on groceries. Sarah carried it back to the building, feeling humbled. That evening, she cooked rice and beans on her hot plate and thought about all the people who depended on food assistance. It wasn't a handout or a sign of laziness. It was a lifeline, the difference between eating and going hungry. And the fact that so many people who worked full-time jobs still needed it said something damning about the system. On day 25, Sarah woke up to find her room was freezing. She could see her breath in the air. When she checked, she discovered the building's heat had broken during the night, and Rosa said it would be at least 2 days before it was fixed. Sarah wrapped herself in every piece of clothing she had, but it wasn't enough. She was exhausted from another double shift at the restaurant. Her body was running on too little food and sleep, and the cold was making everything worse. She sat on her bed, shivering, and for the first time, she seriously considered calling the hotline. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey," he said, "just checking in. How are you doing?" "The heat's broken," Sarah said, trying to keep her teeth from shattering. "But I'm fine, only 5 more days." There was a pause. "Sarah, you don't sound fine. Where are you?" "In my room. It's okay, really. I've been through worse this month." "I'm coming over," Marcus said. "You don't have to do that. I'm already on my way." 20 minutes later, Marcus arrived with a thick jacket and a thermos of hot soup.
"I bought these from a street vendor," he explained, completely within the rules. "The jacket was on sale for $10, which I'm gifting to you as allowed by the challenge parameters for emergency necessities." Sarah wanted to argue, but she was too cold and too grateful. She put on the jacket and drank the soup, feeling warmth spread through her body for the first time in hours. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus sat next to her on the bed, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Sarah, you've already proven your point. You've lasted 25 days. That's incredible. You don't have to keep going." "Yes, I do," Sarah said. "Not because of the bet anymore. Because I need to finish this, for myself. I need to know I can do the full 30 days. And because every day I stay, I understand more. Yesterday, I went to a food pantry. I stood in line with people who work full-time and still can't afford food. I need to see this through." "You're stubborn," Marcus observed, but he was smiling. "So are you," Sarah replied. "We're both impossible people." "Maybe that's why this works," Marcus said, quietly. Sarah turned to look at him, and suddenly the small space between them felt charged with electricity. "What?" she asked, even though she knew the answer. "This," Marcus said, gesturing between them. "Us. I didn't expect this when I challenged you. I didn't expect to fall for you." Sarah's breath caught. "You fell for me?" "How could I not?" Marcus said. "You're brilliant and stubborn, and you've spent the last 3 weeks living in poverty without complaining, learning, growing. I've watched you befriend the people in this building, work in a hot kitchen washing dishes, go to food pantries without shame. You've done more in these weeks than most people do in a lifetime. You've transformed from someone who thought they understood the world into someone who actually does. You're magnificent." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, though she wasn't sure if they were from his words or from the relief of not being alone in this feeling. "I fell for you too," she admitted. "Somewhere between the terrible rice I've been cooking and you showing up to check if I'd quit. You're not what I expected. An arrogant billionaire trying to put me in my place? That's what I thought you were. But you're more than that. You're kind and thoughtful, and you actually care about making the world better, not just saying you do. And you see me, the real me, not just the successful hedge fund manager. You see who I'm becoming." Marcus reached out and took her hand, his warm fingers wrapping around her cold ones. "5 more days," he said. "You're going to make it, and when you do, I'm taking you to the best restaurant in the city." "I might have forgotten how to eat with real silverware," Sarah joked. "We'll figure it out together," Marcus promised. The last 5 days felt both endless and too short. Sarah was running on fumes, but she was determined. She'd made it this far, she could make it to the end. Marcus visited every day, bringing allowable items, and mostly just his presence, which Sarah found she craved more than food or warmth. On day 29, Maria from the restaurant pulled Sarah aside. "You're different from when you started," she observed. "Stronger, more real." "I feel different," Sarah admitted. "This experience has changed me." "That's good," Maria said. "Change is good, especially when it makes—"
"You better. You gonna forget about us when you go back to your fancy life?" "Never," Sarah said firmly. "I promise you that. In fact, I'm going to find a way to make things better. For you, for Keisha, for everyone who's stuck in this cycle. I don't know exactly how yet, but I'm going to do something." Maria smiled and hugged her. "I believe you," she said. "You got a good heart. I can see it now." That evening, Sarah sat in her room and reflected on the journey. 30 days ago, she'd been a different person. Confident, successful, but fundamentally disconnected from the reality most people lived. Now, she understood in a visceral way what struggle meant. She'd learned that poverty wasn't a moral failing, but a trap that was easy to fall into and nearly impossible to escape. She'd learned that the people who had the least often gave the most, like Keisha sharing her food and Maria looking out for her. She'd learned that systemic change wasn't just a nice idea, but an urgent necessity. She'd also learned something about herself. She was stronger than she'd known, more adaptable, more capable of empathy and growth. And she'd found something she hadn't expected to find, something that scared and exhilarated her in equal measure. She'd found love. The morning of day 30 arrived. Sarah had made it. She'd survived 30 days on $100 plus what she'd earned washing dishes. She'd lived in a cramped room, eaten rice and beans until she could barely stand the sight of them, and learned more about herself and the world than she had in her entire previous life. Marcus arrived at exactly 9 a.m., the time the challenge officially ended. He had a lawyer with him and a check for $5 million made out to the New Futures Job Training Program, the charity Sarah had selected. "You did it," he said, pride evident in his voice and eyes. "I honestly didn't think anyone from your background could, but you proved me wrong. You proved a lot of things wrong, actually, including my assumption that this would be simple or straightforward." Sarah took the check, looking at the zeros. "This is going to help a lot of people," she said. "But Marcus, I want to do more. I've been thinking about it constantly these last few days. I want to start a foundation, combining your expertise and mine, using my financial skills and your understanding of what actually works in economic development. Real, sustainable change. Not charity that makes us feel good but accomplishes nothing. Actual solutions." "I'd like that," Marcus said. "Partners?" "Partners," Sarah agreed, shaking his hand formally before they both laughed at the absurdity of the gesture given everything they'd been through together. "There's one more thing," Marcus said. His voice had changed, become softer, more vulnerable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Sarah's heart started pounding. "Over the last 30 days, I've watched you face challenges with courage and grace. I've seen you learn and grow and become even more remarkable than you already were. I've fallen completely in love with you, Sarah Mitchell. I know this is fast, and I know we've only known each other a month, but every day of this challenge, I've seen more clearly that you're the person I want to spend my life with. Will you marry me?" Sarah stared at the ring, a simple band with a single diamond. It was beautiful and completely unexpected. "Are you serious?" she managed. "I've never been more serious about anything," Marcus said. "I know who you are now. Not the shark in Louboutins, but the woman who washed dishes without complaining and shared her food from the food pantry with a homeless woman outside the building because you knew what hunger felt like. The woman who learned to ask for help when she needed it. The woman who cried in frustration but never quit. The real you. And I love her completely. I love your strength and your vulnerability and your determination to make things better. I love everything about you." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes. I love you too. I didn't expect this. I came into this challenge thinking I'd prove you wrong and walk away with a good story. Instead, I found out I was wrong about almost everything. And I found you. So yes, Marcus Chen, I will marry you." Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, right there in her tiny room that had been home for the last month, with the lawyer awkwardly looking away. When they broke apart, Sarah was laughing and crying at the same time. "I must look terrible," she said, suddenly aware of her unwashed hair and worn clothes that she'd been living in for a month. "You look perfect," Marcus said. "But how about we go get you a real shower and a real meal? I've made reservations at that restaurant I mentioned. And maybe we can swing by your apartment so you can get some fresh clothes." "Best idea I've heard in 30 days," Sarah replied. Before they left, Sarah knocked on doors in the building. She hugged Keisha and promised to stay in touch, giving her a phone number where she could be reached. She said goodbye to the other residents who'd become familiar faces, people who'd shown her kindness when they had little to give. Rosa was at the bottom of the stairs. "You leaving?" she asked. "Yes," Sarah said, "but I wanted to thank you for giving me a place to stay and for not asking too many questions." Rosa shrugged. "You paid your rent, that's all I needed to know. But you're different now than when you came. Softer somehow, more human." Sarah smiled. "I learned a lot here." "Good," Rosa said. "Maybe you rich people should all have to live like this for a while. Might make the world better." You might be right, Sarah said. In fact, I'm going to see what I can do about that. They left the building together, and Sarah took one last look back at room 12, visible from the street. A month ago, this place would have horrified her. Now, it represented something important. A reminder that life could be hard, that privilege was real, and that understanding other people's struggles wasn't just about empathy, but about experiencing even a fraction of what they went through every day. The restaurant Marcus took her to was exquisite, the kind of place Sarah had eaten at regularly before the challenge, but which now felt almost surreal in its luxury. The menu had no prices listed, which she remembered meant they were astronomical. The napkins were cloth, heavy and soft. The water glasses were crystal. Everything was beautiful and perfect, and completely disconnected from the reality she'd been living. "Is it weird that I feel guilty ordering this?" Sarah asked, looking at the menu with its expensive entrees. "A little," Marcus admitted. "That never completely goes away. I still remember what hunger feels like. Even now, even with everything I have, I can't forget. But you can enjoy nice things while also working to make sure everyone has enough. That's the balance. The guilt isn't useful if it just makes you feel bad. It's only useful if it motivates you to act." Their food arrived, beautifully plated, and probably containing more calories than Sarah had eaten in an entire day during the challenge. She took a bite and closed her eyes, savoring flavors she'd almost forgotten existed. "It's so good," she said. "But honestly, the soup you brought me when the heat was broken tasted just as good in that moment." "Context matters," Marcus agreed. "Everything matters more when you have less. Pleasure is relative. That's something people with money never understand. They think more expensive always means better. But sometimes a hot meal when you're starving is worth more than any Michelin-starred dinner." Sarah looked at her engagement ring, catching the light. "I never thought I'd be here," she said. "A month ago, if someone told me I'd be engaged to the man I considered an arrogant billionaire, and that I'd have spent 30 days living in poverty to get here, I would have laughed in their face. Life is strange." "And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I know that this is exactly where I'm supposed to be," Sarah said. "With you, doing work that actually matters. I spent years moving money around for rich people to get richer. It was exciting and challenging, but it was hollow. I was good at it, but it didn't mean anything. This feels real. This feels like it matters." "It does matter," Marcus assured her, "and it's going to be hard. Changing systems always is. We're going to face pushback from people who don't want things to change, who profit from the way things are. We're going to be called naive or unrealistic. People are going to say we're wasting our money." "I know," Sarah said, "but I also know we can do it. If I can survive 30 days on $100, if I can work in a hot kitchen and sleep in a freezing room and feed myself on $7 a day, I can handle whatever comes next. I'm not afraid anymore. Well, I am afraid, but I'm not letting fear stop me." "That's my girl," Marcus said with a smile that made Sarah's heart flip. Over the next weeks and months, Sarah and Marcus threw themselves into building their foundation. They hired people who'd actually experienced poverty, not just studied it. They consulted with community organizers and activists who'd been doing this work for decades. They visited neighborhoods and listened to what people actually needed instead of assuming they knew best. Sarah reconnected with Maria and the other people she'd met during her challenge. She offered Maria a position as a consultant for the foundation, paying her a salary that finally allowed her to quit her second job. She helped Keisha apply for job training programs and childcare assistance. She stayed in touch with Rosa, eventually purchasing her building and renovating it to provide better housing for tenants at affordable rents. The press conference came 2 weeks after the challenge ended. Once Sarah had time to process everything and prepare, she stood next to Marcus, wearing her own clothes for the first time in over a month, feeling both comfortable and somehow constrained by them. They announced the $5 million donation and their engagement in the same breath, and the room erupted in questions. "Miss Mitchell, what did you learn from this experience?" a reporter called out. Sarah thought about how to answer, wanting to be honest but also eloquent. "Everything," she said finally. I learned that poverty isn't a personal failing, but a systematic problem. I learned that people working minimum wage jobs often work harder than I ever did in finance, for a fraction of the pay and respect. I learned that one unexpected expense can destroy someone's life when they're living on the edge. I learned what hunger feels like, what cold feels like when you can't afford heat, what it's like to budget every single penny and still come up short. But mostly, I learned that we, the privileged, have a responsibility not just to acknowledge these problems, but to fix them. And I learned that I had been living in a bubble, disconnected from reality, and that bubble needed to burst. "And what are you going to do about it?" another reporter asked. "We're starting a foundation," Sarah said. "Not just another charity that throws money at problems and hopes for the best, but one that addresses root causes. Job training with actual guaranteed employment at the end, because training is worthless without jobs. Affordable housing that doesn't trap people in poverty, that's actually nice enough that you'd want to live there yourself. Financial literacy programs taught by people who understand what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, not some academic who's never struggled. Advocacy for living wages and better labor protections, real systemic solutions." "Mr. Chen," a reporter called out, "why did you issue this challenge in the first place?" Marcus took Sarah's hand before answering. "Because I was tired of people claiming that poverty is a choice," he said. "I was tired of hearing people say that anyone can make it if they just work hard enough, when that's demonstrably false. I grew up poor. I know that I got out because of luck as much as effort. I wanted to prove that understanding privilege requires more than just talking about it. It requires actually confronting what life is like without it. I thought this challenge would teach Sarah a lesson. I didn't expect it to change both our lives." "You proposed after the challenge ended," someone shouted. "No," Marcus said firmly. "The bet was about survival and understanding. This," he said, indicating Sarah and himself, "is about love. I fell in love with Sarah because of who she became during this challenge. She could have quit at any time, but she persisted. She learned and grew and became even more remarkable than she already was. She worked a job washing dishes. She went to food pantries. She lived in a room smaller than most people's closets. And she did it all without complaining, without making excuses. That's the woman I want to spend my life with." Sarah squeezed his hand, feeling overwhelming gratitude for this man who'd challenged her to become better, who'd seen potential in her she hadn't known existed. "Miss Mitchell," a reporter asked, "do you think everyone in your position should do something like this?" Sarah considered the question. "I think everyone who has resources and privilege should find some way to truly understand what life is like for people without those advantages," she said carefully. "Whether that's this specific challenge or something else. But understanding can't just be academic. You can't read about poverty and think you get it. You have to experience some version of it, even if it's temporary and you know you have an escape route. That said, I also think the bigger issue is systemic. Individual challenges are good for opening eyes, but we need policy changes. Living wages, affordable housing, universal health care, strong safety nets. Those are the things that will actually make a difference." The questions continued for another 30 minutes, but eventually the press conference ended. Sarah and Marcus escaped to Marcus's car, both exhausted from the scrutiny and intensity. "That went well," Marcus said as they drove through the city. "You were articulate and passionate. People are going to listen." "I hope so," Sarah said. "But I'm also realistic. Talk is cheap. We need to actually deliver results, or we're just another pair of rich people with good intentions and no follow-through." "We'll deliver," Marcus promised. "I didn't build 3 successful companies by accident. I know how to execute. And you didn't become a top hedge fund manager without being brilliant and driven. Together, we're going to change things." The foundation started small, but grew quickly. They opened their first job training center in Queens, not far from where Sarah had lived during the challenge. They partnered with local businesses to guarantee interviews for program graduates. They provided wraparound services, childcare and transportation and interview clothes, all the things that people needed to succeed but couldn't afford. The results were immediate and powerful. 87% of their first cohort found jobs within 3 months of completing the program. Not just any jobs, but ones that paid living wages with benefits. Sarah attended the first graduation ceremony and cried when she saw the pride on people's faces. One of the graduates was a woman named Patricia who'd been working 3 part-time jobs to support her kids. She approached Sarah after the ceremony. "Thank you," she said simply. "You changed my life. I start my new job next week, full-time, with benefits and everything. My kids are going to have stability for the first time." "You did this," Sarah said. "You put in the work. We just provided the opportunity." "But you understood what we needed," Patricia said. "Most programs like this, they're designed by people who never struggled. They don't get it. You got it. That made all the difference." Those words stayed with Sarah. She repeated them to Marcus that night as they sat in his apartment planning the next phase of the foundation's work. She said, "I understood," Sarah told him. "And I think that's the key. Not just throwing money at problems, but actually understanding what people need, because you've been there, or at least close enough to there that you can empathize." "That's why this is going to work," Marcus said. "We're not coming in as saviors. We're coming in as partners. We're listening and responding, not dictating." They expanded gradually, opening centers in other cities, always hiring locally, always consulting with community members about what was actually needed. They built affordable housing that was actually nice, with community spaces and green areas and proximity to jobs and schools. They lobbied for policy changes, using their platform and resources to push for living wages and stronger labor protections. Not everyone was supportive. They faced criticism from conservatives who thought they were enabling dependency, and from progressives who thought they weren't doing enough. Sarah learned to navigate the criticism, staying focused on results rather than rhetoric. The wedding was 6 months after the challenge ended, a combination of elegant and meaningful. They held it at a community center in the neighborhood where Sarah had lived during her 30 days, donating the money they would have spent on a fancy venue to local schools instead. The guest list was eclectic. Wall Street colleagues sitting next to restaurant workers, tech entrepreneurs mixing with community organizers. Maria and Keisha and Rosa were there, dressed up and beaming. Donald from the library came. Even some of the people Sarah had met at the Wednesday church dinners attended. As Sarah walked down the aisle toward Marcus, past faces both familiar and new, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. A challenge issued out of frustration and pride had become something neither of them expected. It had stripped away her assumptions and rebuilt her understanding of the world. It had brought her love and purpose and a clarity about what mattered. Marcus met her at the altar with tears in his eyes. "You're beautiful," he whispered as she took his hands. "You're not so bad yourself," Sarah replied with a smile. The officiant, a pastor from the church where Sarah had eaten those Wednesday dinners, began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of 2 people who found each other in an unexpected way. Their journey to this moment has been unconventional, marked by challenge and growth and a shared commitment to making the world better. That's a strong foundation for a marriage." Sarah barely heard the rest of the words. She was looking at Marcus, at the man who challenged her to become better, who'd fallen in love with her not despite her flaws, but because of her willingness to grow. She was thinking about the future they'd build together, the lives they'd change, the love they'd share. "I do," she said when prompted, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "I do," Marcus echoed, and then they were kissing as husband and wife, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was joyful chaos, a mix of worlds that rarely collided. Sarah danced with Marcus, with Maria, with her father, with random kids from the community center who'd crashed the party and were welcomed anyway. She talked to her old colleagues and explained her new work, watching some of them look uncomfortable and others genuinely interested. At one point, she found herself standing on the balcony with Marcus and Jennifer, her best friend who'd been so worried about the challenge months ago. "I can't believe you actually did
"It?" Jennifer said, shaking her head. "When you told me about this crazy bet, I thought you'd lost your mind. But look at you now, married to a billionaire, starting a foundation, actually making a difference. And you're happy, really happy, in a way you never were before." "I am happy," Sarah confirmed. "This is what I was missing. Purpose, understanding, love that's built on something real, not just attraction or convenience." Marcus wrapped his arm around her waist. "Best bet I ever made," he said, "even if I did lose the money." "You didn't lose," Sarah said, turning in his arms to face him. "We both won. I won perspective and purpose, and you won, well, what did you win?" "I won you," Marcus said simply, "and the satisfaction of knowing I was right about you. That underneath all that Wall Street armor was someone who could actually care, who could change, who could be remarkable. I won a partner in every sense of the word." They kissed as the sun set over the city. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way, who'd learned that love could grow from challenge and understanding, and who were ready to spend their lives making the world better, one person, one community, one day at a time. The years that followed were filled with work and love and impact. The foundation flourished, expanding to 15 cities, then 20, then more. They opened job training centers, built affordable housing, created investment vehicles that funded social enterprises, and lobbied successfully for policy changes at the local and state level. Sarah used her financial expertise in ways she never had before, structuring deals that benefited communities rather than just investors. She created models for social impact investing that other organizations copied. She became a voice for economic justice, writing op-eds and giving speeches, and using her platform to change how people thought about poverty and privilege. Marcus used his tech background to develop platforms that connected people with resources and opportunities. He created apps that helped people find affordable housing, access job training, and navigate social services. He leveraged his network to bring other wealthy tech entrepreneurs into the work, gradually building a movement. But their greatest success wasn't measured in dollars or people served, though those numbers were impressive. It was measured in the small moments. The single mother who got job training and now supported her family comfortably. The teenager who'd thought college was impossible but got a full scholarship through their program and was now in medical school. The community that came together to support each other because the foundation had provided the initial resources and structure. Sarah never forgot those 30 days. She kept a photo of room 12 on her desk in their foundation office as a reminder. When board members questioned whether certain programs were worth the investment, she'd remember what hunger felt like. When donors suggested they focus on more deserving poor people, implying that some poverty was deserved, she'd remember Maria working 60 hours a week and still struggling, and she'd push back hard. 5 years after the challenge, Sarah and Marcus returned to the building where she'd lived. It had been completely renovated now, part of their affordable housing initiative, transformed from a run-down building with broken heat into something people could be proud to call home. They knocked on what had been room 12, now a comfortable studio apartment with new appliances and fresh paint and heat that actually worked. A young woman answered, a college student working her way through school while living in affordable housing that didn't eat up all her income. "Yes?" she asked, curious about the well-dressed couple at her door. "We used to know this place," Sarah explained. "I actually lived in this room for a month, 5 years ago. Just wanted to see how it turned out." The woman's eyes widened. "You're Sarah Chen, aren't you? From the foundation? Oh my God, come in, please." She invited them in, proud to show off her home. "It's not fancy," she said, gesturing around at the small but comfortable space, "but it's mine, and I can afford it while finishing my degree. The foundation's housing program changed my life. I was living in a shelter before this, trying to stay in school, but it was so hard. Now I have stability. I can study without worrying about where I'm going to sleep. I'm going to graduate this year." Sarah looked at Marcus and saw the same emotion in his eyes that she felt.
the kind of satisfaction that came from making a real difference in someone's life. "That's why we do this," she said to the young woman, her voice thick with emotion. "Everyone deserves a chance. Everyone deserves stability and safety and the opportunity to pursue their dreams." "Thank you," the young woman said simply. "You changed everything for me." As they left the building, Marcus took
Sarah's hand. "You know," he said, "I challenged you 5 years ago, thinking I'd prove a point about privilege and maybe humble you a little. I never imagined it would lead to all this. A foundation that's actually changing lives. A marriage built on shared purpose and real love. A whole new way of thinking about what success means." "No regrets?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Marcus said, "except maybe not proposing sooner. We could have started all this earlier." "We started exactly when we were supposed to," Sarah said. "I needed those 30 days to become who I needed to be, to shed my assumptions and my armor and my certainty that I already understood everything. I needed to be broken down and rebuilt. The timing was perfect." "You were always worthy," Marcus said, stopping to face her fully. "You just needed to see it yourself. And you needed to see the world clearly. Those things had to happen in that order." They walked through the neighborhood, greeted by people who knew them, who'd been helped by their programs, whose lives had changed because 2 stubborn people had taken a bet and turned it into something meaningful. Children playing in the park they'd funded, adults heading to jobs they'd gotten through foundation training programs, families living in housing that was affordable and safe and didn't trap them in poverty. Sarah thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, so confident in her superiority, so certain she understood how the world worked, so disconnected from the reality most people lived. She'd been humbled and transformed, broken down and rebuilt. And through it all, she'd found love, purpose, and understanding. The challenge had lasted 30 days. The lessons had lasted a lifetime. And the love that had grown from it continued to deepen with each passing year, built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared purpose, and the knowledge that together they could make the world a little bit better. As the sun set on another day, Sarah leaned against Marcus and smiled. "Best $100 I ever spent," she joked, repeating the line that had become a running joke between them. "Technically, I spent it," Marcus reminded her, playing his part in their familiar routine. "Fine, best $100 we ever spent," Sarah amended. "It bought us everything that matters. Each other, purpose, understanding. Not a bad return on investment." They walked home together, hand in hand, ready for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring, knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it together, just as they'd faced everything else. 2 people from different worlds who'd found common ground in the most unexpected way, and who'd built something beautiful from what began as a simple bet. The story of the billionaire who bet she couldn't survive 30 days with $100 had a happy ending after all. Not because Sarah won the bet, though she had. Not because they made a difference, though they did. But because both of them won something far more valuable than any wager. They won understanding, compassion, and love. They won the knowledge that change was possible, that growth was always available to those willing to do the hard work, that privilege could be used as a tool for justice rather than just personal enrichment. And that, Sarah thought as she looked at her husband and partner and best friend, was worth more than all the money in the world. The challenge had ended 5 years ago, but its impact continued to ripple outward, changing lives and perspectives and systems, proof that sometimes the most transformative journeys begin with a single step, or, in their case, a single provocative challenge in a crowded coffee shop.